everybody.
Okay. Our interview this morning is with William A. Bill Hall. Bill was born in New York City in March of 1949. He served in the United States Army from 1966 until 1989. Highest rank attained was E9 Sergeant Major. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas on Saturday, September the 10th, 2011. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Bill Hall in any way. Also in the room is Milton Gibson, who is our videographer. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and also for Operation Remember, City of Burleson, Texas. And with that little intro, Bill, you can tell us about your time in the U.S. military, sir.
Well, I joined the military because I dropped out of school when I was really stopped going to school when I was 15, got a job in a factory ironing ties. It's a very boring profession. And about a month and a half before I turned 17, I decided I wanted to be a Marine. So I went to the Marine recruiter, and the Marine recruiter grilled me about my criminal background, and I had never been in trouble. And he just didn't seem to believe me, and he made me mad. So I went across the street to the Army recruiter, and he took me out and bought me a hamburger. And therefore, I joined the Army. And he told me I could do anything I wanted to do after the preliminary test, and I told him, because the Barry Sadler song, the Battle of the Green Berets, was out, that I just wanted to go over there and shoot bad guys. And he said, well, that would be the infantry, son. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And I said, that's what I want to do. And so on my 3 days after my 17th birthday, on March 6, 1966, I joined the Army as an infantryman on a 4-year tour with my parents' permission. I only got my parents' permission by promising my mother I would not go to Vietnam, and I joined for 4-year infantry unassigned Germany. Now, I had a contract to go to Germany, so I went to basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and then I took advanced infantry training also at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I don't think they did it there for a very long time, but I had my advanced infantry training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I kind of thought when I was taking that training it was a rush job, and that certainly turned out to be true. They trained me on things I'd never seen before, I never used till I got into Vietnam. I left still wanting to go to Vietnam, even though I promised my mother I wouldn't. At the end of AIT, they asked, advanced infantry training, they asked, we were allowed to elect to go wherever to request where we wanted to go. Well, the closest place to Vietnam that I could go at 17 was Hawaii. So I volunteered to go to Hawaii, but I was on a contract to go to Germany. Not noticing my contract, I guess they figured, well, if this guy wants to get close to the South Pacific, they were putting together the 11th Light Infantry Brigade in Schofield Barracks, replaced the 25th Division. They had the 11th Brigade there. They were getting them ready to go to Vietnam, and I would be 18 by about the time they were ready to go. So they sent me to Hawaii, the 11th Light Infantry Brigade. About a month after I got there, my mother figured out that I wasn't going to Germany via Hawaii. And she wrote a congressman or whatever, I don't know, but First Sergeant called me in one day and chewed me out for being a dummy. And next thing I knew, I was on my way to Germany. And so I spent 3 months in A Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Infantry at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And then I went to Germany. While flying to Germany, I left Fort Dix on the old MAC flights. I sat next to a guy who was an E4 who was a paratrooper. And I was not a paratrooper, but he was, and he had his boots and his jump wings. I thought that looked cool. And I told him I always wanted to be a paratrooper. I actually had never given it any thought at all, but I told him that. We landed in Frankfurt, Germany, went the 21st Replacement Detachment, got off the bus or whatever they moved us in. It was probably trucks. And they had us put up our gears, and they said, all right, everybody with a 1-1, the infantry MOS, and I was a mortarman by training, a light heavy weapons infantryman. Everybody with a 1-1 MOS, go to this room. So I went there with this guy that I buddied up with on the plane. He was an E4, and a sergeant from the 509th Parachute Infantry, from 2nd Battalion, 509th Infantry, that was then part of the 1st Brigade of the 8th Division, came out on stage and said, we just had to ship a bunch of guys to Vietnam, and we're short paratroopers. Anybody here want to be a paratrooper? I was sitting right next to that guy I told that story to. So I put my hand up. And I ended up going to the 509th and went to jump school and became a paratrooper. Kind of accidental, but what could I do? I didn't want to know. I didn't want to be, I was kind of shamed into it. And so I was a paratrooper for until I retired. I was in Germany from December 1st of 1966 until the beginning of May of 67, because in March of 67, when I had 1 year in service and just turned 18, I was eligible for a program they called a short-term reenlistment. I was able to re-enlist for another 4 years, disregarding the first year, and volunteer to go to Vietnam because I was afraid I was going to miss the war. And so I re-enlisted to go to Vietnam, and they accommodated me. I took a leave at home, and I was sent to the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. That was my orders read, and landed in Bien Hoa on June 23rd, 1967. I got on a truck to go to the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, and somebody said, "Everybody who's airborne qualified, get off the truck." 101st just took a bunch of casualties, and the old 1st Brigade 101st was still a paratrooper unit then. And I got sent up to the 101st, went through their training and a little pre-combat training. So the first time I ever saw an M16, my training was with M14s originally. And I fired a magazine, a semi, and a magazine and automatic. I think it's all I fired. 5, 6 days later, I went to A Company, 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry, and they were on a stand down in Duck Pho. It was July 4th. I remember the day because they were having kind of a little party there. My unit had just taken a whole bunch of casualties. There was 13 of us that reported to my company at that time, and so we were all new guys. My first time I went to the field was what they call an Eagle flight. I guess we went up and we responded to some intel. It's the only time I was ever around anything that was on camera was on that mission. We reacted to some intel, and my platoon liberated a POW camp with a whole bunch of Vietnamese. There were supposed to have been Americans there, but we missed them by a couple of days. There was 20-odd people. They looked like they were held on like long tables with their legs tied down with something like I have to show this, the stocks that you see the pilgrims they put the guy's head in. They had these big long wooden things, and they had these poor Vietnamese with their ankles in these big wooden things, and they were emaciated. They must have, they're little people, but they probably weighed 70, 75 pounds. It was a miracle some of them were alive. So they came in and they flew them out. They were real glad to see us. And we didn't even know what it was. We didn't have any Vietnamese speakers with us. So then I spent, from July 4th of 67 until early March of 68 in A Company 1st 327th Infantry. During that time, we were in a bunch of small contacts. Actually, in my 30 months in Vietnam, 70% of the combat was in that time. It was pretty active. We were in the Chu Lai area from August through November of 67, and we took a lot of casualties. August 18th through August 23rd of 67, my company took about, I'm going to guess, 75% casualties. 8 or 10 killed and probably 75, 80 wounded. I'm guessing with the ratios. I don't know. There was a whole lot. And I just managed not to stop a bullet. We had, sometime in there, I was given an M79 grenade launcher. And actually, I was given first an XM-148, which was an experimental model over and under with a grenade launcher under an M16. It's not the one currently in service. And when I told my platoon sergeant that I had never fired a grenade launcher, he told me I was full of it. I just didn't want to carry the ammunition. I swear I never fired one. I must have been on KP that day. I never fired one. First round I fired at an enemy soldier was a high explosive round. I said, and they took that away from me after about 2 weeks. I never fired it at anybody. And they gave me a grenade launcher. And on August 23rd, because we got in a big fight that day. I remember the date. Myself, me, and another guy with a grenade launcher, an M79, just a plain breakdown grenade launcher, no rifle, and two other guys with rifles, went on a water run. And like four typical 18-year-old privates, not thinking this is in mountainous terrain. Who's pulling security? The two guys with the grenade launchers. The two guys with the rifles are filling canteens. And I look down the stream, and there's another guy down there filling a canteen. It was a North Vietnamese soldier, kind of green-looking uniform. And he looked at me. His eyes got big. And I stood there, and I carried this grenade launcher broken open like a shotgun. By the way, I never fired a shotgun either. So this is my first time firing a break-open weapon. First time in my life. And I tried to close it, and the latch had closed on its own. And I couldn't close it. I'm standing there. If he'd had a rifle, he'd have killed me. Or if he thought he might have had one, I didn't see it. I finally opened it. I closed it, and they said, just point it and elevate it. Well, he was 50 yards away. I pointed it, and I elevated it about a couple of foot in the air, fired the round about 150 yards downstream past this guy. But I scared him because he ran out of his shoes. He was standing in some mud, and the four of us, real smart privates, wanting to get it was important to get a body count in those days. We decided we were going to get this guy, and we maneuvered down there. And when we got there, the only thing left of him was his Ho Chi Minh jump boots, we used to call them, these tire tracks that they used for shoes, and they were like retread tires. They had these rubber straps over the top of them. They'd stuck in the mud. And he jumped so fast, he jumped out of them. They were still there in the mud. And his canteen cork. So since the war, not much came out of that war, I hope that guy survived. And he's telling that story. Yeah, it's just ugly American upstream, and he didn't know what he was doing. So, whatever. And so we got in contact later, about an hour later, and lost a platoon leader. And I lost my first squad leader was killed, John Grimmett. And first time that I saw an American killed that I knew. I'd seen guys a couple of weeks earlier get killed, but I didn't know him. And Wheeler was a real good guy. And then we had a lot of, I don't know, there's a whole lot of context. There's a lot of things I could talk about in this minimum time. I saw two Vietnamese nurses attempt to defend 15 or 20 wounded people who were trying to escape. And we couldn't get them to surrender. They kept throwing hand grenades. One of the most valorous things I ever saw. And they both got killed. We shot the trees down and tore them up with machine guns. Unbelievable. So there's valor on both sides. These were girls. October 3rd, 1967, got in a big contact and lost a bunch of guys. I flew in with the bodies to go on R&R, went to Bangkok. And again, a bunch of little contacts. January 24th of 68, got in another big contact, lost another squad leader, and I got the stripe. So I just managed not to stop a bullet, and I became a buck sergeant. I'm still 18. And then in early March, our lieutenant from our company went to the battalion motor platoon, and I looked around at the guys that I got in country with, and there's very few of us left. And I decided that I might want to live to be 19. And so I asked him if he needed a mortarman, and he didn't. And I extended my tour to go to our battalion mortar platoon. So I spent about from early July through early March in A Company, and then I went to what became E Company, 1st to 327th. I was in an 81 millimeter mortar platoon. I was there about a week when we were on a fire support base, Birmingham, in the I-Corps area during the whole Tet thing. And this is March 16th of 68. We'd been in contact on and off for days. We were getting rocketed and mortared, and we were sitting on this hill overlooking the Perfume River, I guess. I think I got the right river. And we got hit. We had some, I guess the Marines came in to put some bombs on the North Vietnamese around the base of the mountain. And a bomb landed, was dropped short, landed next to the artillery FDC, which is about, there was a 105 battery up the hill from me. And I was standing in my mortar pit without my helmet on. And a piece of shell fragmentation hit hit me in the head, and I got wounded. And I went to the rear, and I came back, evidently, but I'd lost 3 or 4 months of time. I can't tell you what happened. I must have had a closed head injury of some sort. I have no disability. I never did anything about it. But all I can tell you is I went home on extension leave in April of '67, and I have no recollection of it. I was there for like 30, 35 days. And I came back to Vietnam, and the next memory that I have is in mid-June, when I was sent to the Vietnamese Army as an advisor to a Vietnamese infantry battalion. I was 19. I was supposed to be advising 40-year-old corporals in what was in effect a nationalized National Guard unit, regional forces they call them. They were, I don't know, they were going to listen to a 19-year-old American, and what I became, in effect, was a fire support coordinator. I really didn't advise anybody, but whenever they needed TAC air, jets, gunships, naval gunfire. We were on the coast in Phan Rang, and we received some gunfire support from some naval vessels. And I did that, and I had to go to a 2-week school prior to taking that assignment, and half a day for 2 weeks was Vietnamese phraseology. We had to learn to say all kinds of stuff like, "Good morning, Captain," whatever. And when I joined the Army, they said I could do anything I wanted to do. I had very high test scores, except be a linguist. I found Vietnamese easy. And so in my 8 months in Vietnamese, working with the regional forces, or 7.5 months or whatever, I bought a book, How to Speak Vietnamese, and I learned. I can still communicate pretty well, and I've had to in working in a hospital here. I do some translating now and then. Anyway, I wanted to stay there and extend again, but they wouldn't let me. They said I was going native, because I could speak Vietnamese, I guess. And they sent me back to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. While I was on leave, I came down with mononucleosis, February of 1969, kissed the wrong girl, and I ended up in St. Albans Naval Hospital in New York, and I was a Sergeant E5. I was 19. And they put me in a ward full of Marines wounded in all the battles of Con Thien, and all these guys were horrendous, all these horrific wounds. Guys had been bayoneted and all that, and I outranked all of them. I was the ranking military person on the ward. I was the only soldier. And these poor guys, some of them were really shot up bad, and they kept me in. I was really sick. They kept me there, I guess, about a month. Part of it, I was like a working patient. And that was and so I would get on an elevator with these guys with bayonet wounds, and they say, "Where were you hit, Sergeant Hall?" "I'm with a mononucleosis system." I felt real bad. But I got to see a lot of these Marines interact with their families, and it was nice to see the kind of support they got. And I went to the 82nd Airborne Division, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in March of '69. And I stayed in the 82nd, and it was stateside duty, and it was kind of different. Again, I turned 20, and spit shine in your boots all of a sudden got real important, and fold in underwear correctly and whatever. And I decided I wanted to go back to Vietnam, and so I volunteered, and they accommodated me. And as I landed back in Vietnam in early January, like January 2nd or 3rd, something like that, January 4th, it's early, I thought, now what have I done? I was assigned to the 4th Infantry Division, and I decided that maybe I ought to try to see if I could find a way not to carry a rucksack around in the field again. So I told people there that I could speak Vietnamese. They sent me to the Civic Action section, the G5 section of the 4th Infantry Division, where I was put in charge of a propaganda team. It was me, a school-trained interpreter who had gone to school for a year to speak Vietnamese, who couldn't speak Vietnamese. He could read and write, but he couldn't speak it. He just couldn't do it. And I had a Vietnamese Kit Carson scout, a turncoat, if you will. He was a Viet Cong guy, supposedly. I always kind of doubted it. He was about my father's age, so he was an old man to me. He was probably 42. And so I showed propaganda movies to Vietnamese for about 2 months, and I just never felt good about doing that. And There was one company of paratroopers in the whole 4th Infantry Division. It was Company K, 75th Rangers. It was the Division Long Range Patrol Company. I went and volunteered for the company, and they told me that they had too many E5s anyway. Almost everybody in the company was on the second tour, or 2/3 of it. And I said, but I can speak Vietnamese, so that helped. Well, they had a couple of Kit Carson scouts. They had a couple of turncoat North Vietnamese soldiers, and all the interpreters that would go out with long-range patrol guys were not Vietnamese. They were Montagnards, and they hated all Vietnamese. This is my opinion, by the way, but they didn't care if they were South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese. They just wanted to kill Vietnamese. They just didn't like them. So that didn't work real good for them to interpret for turncoat North Vietnamese soldiers. So I got assigned to be the guy that went out with the two Vietnamese that were willing to go out with LRP teams. I went out with them in 2 missions and quickly figured out these guys, if they were, whatever they were doing in the Army, not to put down cooks, but they must have been cooks. They sure weren't the officers they said they were. They didn't know anything. They didn't know anything about anything military. They were North Vietnamese by their accent. You can't mistake them. It's a very marked difference in their accents. So I came back and I said, these guys, they're going to get somebody killed, and they have no idea what they're doing. The area they said they worked in, which we've taken them in, they were supposed to show us stuff. They didn't know what they were doing. So they got rid of them, and they invited me to stay, because on the second mission there was a contact, and I guess I behaved pretty well. And they made me an assistant team leader on a Ranger team, and shortly before, minutes before my first mission, the team leader was injured in a freak accident. And I took out Ranger Team 6 on that mission, and actually retrieved a bunch of stuff from another team that had been shot out of a landing zone, had a guy killed and 2 wounded. It was a 4-man team. I took the survivor and went back in and got a radio and a couple of weapons that were left behind. It's a long story, but it worked out. It worked out pretty well. And for me personally, high point of my military career, even though I stayed in the Army and was first sergeant, a sergeant major, and did all that, was the time I was a team leader in a Ranger company. I was a 21-year-old E5, and I'm 86 there. And I took my 4 or 5-man team out all by myself, mostly out of artillery range. And we got in trouble. I called all my own air. If I got in a bind, and we got in a lot of contact. In 1970, the infantry companies in the 4th Division were not getting in much contact, but we were. The North Vietnamese were out there. My opinion is they were just avoiding contact because once we start bombing, they knew they won the war, and they figured, why lose people? So, but we've sure got in contact with them. But when I got on the phone and wanted airstrikes, I got them. I had a fact buzzing over my head, and we had gunships that flew for us. We had a couple of guns that flew for us. Call signs were Gambler 37 and Gambler 38. I remember that. We did a whole lot of gunships, and I was captain of my own ship when I was out there. I made my own decisions, and if they hadn't deactivated the company in December 1970 and sent it back to the States, I'd have probably stayed there. I enjoyed it. I went back to the States. I was actually discharged for a brief period of time, about 2 months. Joined the New York Army National Guard, was in the New York Guard for another 2 months, and went back on active duty. Spent 3 years in the 82nd Airborne Division. Was there about 2 years, got called to division headquarters one day, and I had no idea why. And as I said, I dropped out of high school, but somebody told me that I would never progress in the Army unless I got some college. So I got a GED, and I started taking CLEP tests. I kept passing them. And I got called to division headquarters, and I talked to Command Sergeant Major John Pierce, who's kind of a famous guy. And the commanding general was General Frederick J. Croson. He's retired as a 4-star general in NATO. I was the commander of USAR when he retired. But he was a 2-star commander of the 82nd Airborne Division then. And Sergeant Major Pierce said that General Croson was tired of having school-trained drivers to be his driver, because he went to the field and he needed a guy to be able to navigate with a map. So he said he wanted an 11 Bravo. I was at that time an 11 Bravo, light weapons infantry. Had been 11F. I might have even been 11F. The old recon MOS. But he said, so we had to have somebody that was in good physical condition no criminal record, and 2 years of college because they had to be able to talk to VIPs that sometimes would be around and be smart enough not to say the wrong thing. And he said, you know how many people there are in the 82nd Airborne Division like that? And I said, no, Sergeant Major. He said, you're it. So you got the job. He said, you volunteer? I said, yes, Sergeant Major. I got that head nod. That was that. So I became the driver for General Frederick J. Croson from, I guess it was April of '74 until he left in September of '74. I was his driver during the period when President Nixon resigned and Gerald Ford took over. And it was very interesting days. It's funny, where, you know, about the time that happened, the Commanding General of the 82nd Airborne Division, the Commanding General of 18th Airborne Corps in Fort Bragg, made a decision to go fishing. There was nobody left in the 82nd Airborne Division. Over the ranking officer on duty was the operations officer. Everybody went. You can draw your own conclusions. Took General Croson to the Corps headquarters, came back. He got his stuff. He went out the door. The 2 1-stars, General Fant, General Warner, went out the door. The Chief of Staff, Colonel Cochran, went out the door. I guess somebody was afraid somebody was going to try and move some units. But anyway, they came back about a day later, and that was that. And then when General Croson left, he told me I could go anywhere I wanted to go. So I went to the 75th Rangers in Fort Lewis, Washington. I was there about 4 months. Went to Ranger School, dislocated my right shoulder, and had it was pretty bad. It had about a 3 or 4 month profile, and that was a new Ranger battalion, and they told me I had to go to a regular infantry unit because I couldn't use somebody with a 3 or 4 month profile on his shoulder, which kind of surprised me. I went to the 9th, but it worked out. I went to the 9th Division. I was there about 5 to 6 months, and then got levied to Germany. Was in the Company C, 2nd Battalion, 4th Infantry. In the 56th, we were an organic infantry battalion, the 56th Field Artillery Brigade, Pershing missiles. And I extended there. I was there for 4 years. Finished my bachelor's degree while I was there. Pretty much, I guess I finished it there. Graduated when I came back. And I was in an odd infantry unit that existed solely to secure the Pershing nuclear missile system. And it was a 3-company infantry battalion that had no mortars. Each company had 4 rifle platoons, and we were motorized. We had deuce-and-a-halves instead of tracks. Again, I got to operate a lot on my own because in times, the doctrine of the day was that in times of increased tension, they would take those missiles and separate them out into, there was, I think, 104 missiles, 104, 109, it was an odd number, in the brigade. They would, I guess that's how many there were. Anyway, they would spread them out into little firing units, and they had big nuclear warheads, and we would go out in the field in the mountains, and we would secure them. We also secured a fixed missile site 24/7. And so I was spent about a quarter of the year on that, dealing with nuclear surety and that type of stuff. And I made E7 there, and we were always short lieutenants, so I certified as an officer, and I usually function without a lieutenant. Had the option to go to OCS in 74, 75, and I decided that if I did that, by the time I had 20 years in, I'd be a captain, and I thought, didn't make any point, didn't make any sense to me, so I never went. But I did fill officer billets, really, for the next 10 years, kind of. Then I left Germany, went to school, learned German while I was there, and I took the defense language test. Again, I wasn't supposed to be qualified to be a linguist, but I took the 4 University of Maryland courses, spent a lot of time with Germans, and challenged the linguist test, and I passed it as a mid-level translator. My German's still pretty good. And then I went back to the States, and I was advised to Readiness Group Selfridge in Selfridge, Michigan. I was an advisor to the Michigan and Indiana National Guard and Reserves. For 2 years, I traveled around teaching the employment of the TOW missile system. This is another one of these deals. This stuff only happens to me. I was supposed to be a TOW trained guy when I got there, and I showed up. The Combined Arms Team Leader was a team of half officers and half NCOs. The lowest ranking guy was an E7. Colonel Richard Holliday was my commander. Great guy, Special Forces officer. He said, Sergeant Hall, he said, I'm tired of waiting on a tow guy. He said, I know you never touched a tow, but this is the infantry school catalog. You got 3 months. I need you to be a tow missile expert. And we're not going to tell anybody you never been in a unit with tow missiles. So I went to Fort Benning. I took the tow trainer course, the Dragon trainer course, and all kinds of anti-tank missile courses. And I traveled around Michigan and Indiana with a guy named Major Rick O'Clair as a team for 2 years, teaching people how to tactically employ tow missiles. And that was an interesting. These guys thought it was like a cannon. It's not like the Guard of today is much more. Well, I'm not going to make a judgment. Tow missiles should be fired from 2,000 meters away. You don't want to fire it up close to something. And those guys would put it right up on the FIBA, right up on the front line because it had a tube, so it kind of looked like a cannon, I guess. Anyway, that was interesting. And they made me the team operations sergeant. I was 5th Army NCO of the year in 1982 as a team operations sergeant. And I was 56th Field Artillery Brigade NCO of the year as an infantryman, I think in 78, my highlights here. So that NCO of the year thing kind of helped out because I made E8 early. I made E7 on time, but I made E8 early. And I came out I made E8 in February of 83. I was assigned to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I was a first sergeant of a basic training company for 3 years. First year and a half, I trained only males. Second year and a half, we alternated males and females. It was really interesting, the contrast between training basically the same POI, females and males alternatively. And anybody who says, I'm sorry, Army, you can't, men and women are different. It's just the way it is. But it was really interesting. And women can do almost anything all by themselves, by the way, without guys around to do it. It's pretty impressive. And I guess I did pretty good there. And I made E9 early. And I was about to retire as an E8. And I came out on the Sergeant Major's Academy list. And I actually had put in retirement papers. I withdrew them. And I went to the Sergeant Major's Academy in Class 27, which began in January of '86 in Fort Bliss, Texas. And I went through the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I was about to be signed to a university as an ROTC instructor. Then I made E9, and they were going to send me to Grafenwehr in Germany in a position that required a German-speaking American NCO. And I would have really liked that, except that I had now had a 14-year-old. I got married and had kids and all this. I had a 14-year-old son, and I thought he would graduate high school in Germany with no place to go because we didn't have a permanent home. My family, I met a girl from Fort Worth while I was in the Army, and she traveled all over with me, but my kids had no roots. And the Sergeant Major's Academy called me and 2 other guys in out of the class and said that we'd like to retain you as instructors. So I stayed in the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I was in the leadership division for 3 years, and I was director of fitness programs also. Went to the Army Master Fitness Trainer course, and I ran all the fitness instruction for the Sergeant Major's Academy. And then I taught in the leadership division. I taught international affairs and comparative cultures, and it was basically a college, which I guess is why they kept me, because at that time I had a bachelor's in history, and we were given college credit for what we were doing. We had a cooperative thing with El Paso Community College. Then I would have stayed in the Army another 7 years, but my 20-year Army wife starting to fidget and about not wanting to be married, and I didn't know what to do, and so I tried to save the marriage, and I retired. That didn't work. Ended up getting married, and I ended up keeping the kids. But anyway, I enjoyed my time in the Army. I wish I could have stayed longer. I would still be in the Army. I really, everything the Army said they were going to do for me, they did for me. They said, go to school, work hard, you'll get promoted. I did. I guess I'm proud to have been a soldier, proud of my service. I don't know what else I could tell you. Pretty much it.
just amazes me how you fellas who spent all those years, you remember so many dates, you remember the units.
I can go.
I think are easy to remember, but the various units that you're in, and you just spout them off. You got them.
You got the short version. I can tell you the platoon, the company, the dates. I can tell you the name of every commander. I could tell you that my company commander in A Company First 327 became a famous guy. I saw him last time I saw him. He was a 2-star general escorting Pat Nixon at Richard Nixon's funeral. I saw him on TV. His name was Julius Johnson. He was a black officer, and that was very rare. In '67, he was our commander, and he was a great commander. One of the reasons I'm alive. I'm sure Lauren's story probably would tell you that.
A couple of quick questions. Somewhere, we hear the term a lot, but you were a buck sergeant. Buck sergeant, E4?
E5.
E5.
E4 was a specialist, or a corporal, one or the other.
Okay, Specker, okay. Worked with the Vietnamese, and I get an impression, but I will ask you, were they good troops?
The ones I was with were indifferent. I was in Phan Rang, in Ninh Thuan province. It was about 35 kilometers south of Cam Ranh Bay. The unit that I was assigned to was the 212. Well, I was in MAT, Mobile Advisory Team, MAT 2-36. It was a 5-man team. We were authorized a captain, a lieutenant, a light weapons, a heavy weapons, and a medic. And if that sounds like a cut-down Special Forces A team, that's what it was. Except we had 2 weeks training, and they had years. And this unit, and we were assigned at the district level. And the districts was a Vietnamese political and military subdivision. You had a province that was like a state. A district was like a county. And the district chief was a military officer. My unit, in a unique attachment, was assigned to an ad hoc battalion that was formed of regional force troops. It had 3 regional force companies, each with about 150 men, supposedly, but you can never see more than 120 of them. And then 2 separate popular force platoons. These are the popular force were units that were raised to protect their hamlets. The popular force platoons where I was were not Vietnamese. They were ethnic Chams. It's really related to Cambodians, a darker skinned people that spoke a different language. The regional force companies, though, were Vietnamese. And we had a couple of Cham villages. It's an old culture that predated the Vietnamese. The commander was a captain who had fought against the Viet Minh with the French. We had NCOs that had been with the French. I struck up a friendship with a young Vietnamese lieutenant. His name was Lieutenant Tu, T-Wee Tu, his name. He taught me most of my Vietnamese. T-Wee Tu's family had put him there because they had political pull. It was a unit that did not see much combat. Basically, my opinion, they avoided it at all. Anyway, and I think we thought that they had a running agreement with the local North Vietnamese. When I was read into the province, I was told in the mountains overlooking Phan Rang, there was 3 red stars in the mountains. They said, secret base 35, secret base 36. And I'm thinking, secret base, we know where it is. Not a secret. We never went up there. We stayed down in the villages. And we only had significant contact a couple of times. Most of the contacts that we had were accidental with North Vietnamese. And the North Vietnamese, it appeared to us, this is just my opinion and the captain that I worked with, the lieutenant, that they were coming down from the mountains to go to the beach, doing some R&R, and we thought our local leader had an agreement with them. During Tet of '68, there had been big fighting there. The villages had lost half their populations. I don't know that they all were killed, but they were napalmed. Our biggest village had napalm stains on a lot of the buildings. There had been a lot of contact there. But when I got there, actually I replaced the guys that went on the MAT teams in the summer of '68 were replacing all the advisors that were killed during the Tet Offensive in '68, especially in the southern part of the country. A lot of the RFPF units during the Tet of '68, I was told, turned, or at least a lot of their people did, and a lot of the NAT team advisors were assassinated. So that's why we got selected. By the way, nobody volunteered to do what I was doing. Nobody wanted to be out there with those guys. It was just us. You didn't really know who was good guy, who was bad guy. My opinion was the people in my unit were trying to ride out the war. They knew it was going to end. My one real good friend felt that we would leave, and it was a matter of time, and they were just trying to survive the war. They had no, the Vietnamese soldiers I talked to didn't even understand what the war was about. Why were the North Vietnamese mad at them? Why was the North Vietnamese mad at the South, and why did we care that the North Vietnamese were mad at them? They had minimal education, probably maybe third or fourth grade education, fifth grade educations for the soldiers. They all came from these little coastal farm communities. They were armed with M1 rifles. By the way, M1 is a tough thing for a guy who was 4'10" to handle. When they had M1s, they mostly used them as grenade launchers. They had their grenade launcher attachment. I had to qualify or familiarize with it. They used their M16, and we started a transition with the 16s, but when I was there, they had M1, M2 carbines, M1 rifles, BARs, 30 caliber, machine guns, and 60 millimeter mortars, none of which I'd ever seen before except in John Wayne movies. But part of our training as advisors was we trained on those weapons. So indifferent is how I would describe them.
Let me go on to TOW missiles. TOW is an anti-tank weapon?
It's a tube launch, optically tracked, wire command linked anti-tank guided missile. Tube launch comes out of a tube, optically tracked at a big optic sight. It trailed 2 wires behind it that, I believe it's 2. Yeah, it's 2 with the TOW, and that controlled there were winged surfaces on the end of it. It had a powerful thing that kicked it out, and you flew it. Wherever those crosshairs were within the range of it, it's a very accurate weapon. It's a really good weapon. And I think it's still in use in some, I guess it's been replaced now, but forever. They modified it for aircraft and all that. But wherever you put the crosshairs on that optic sight, that's where that thing was going to hit. The gunner literally flew it. It was a stable platform. It had a range of, back then, of 3,000 meters. They moved it up to almost 4,000 meters with improved TOWs. But it replaced the old 106 millimeter recoilless rifle as an anti-tank weapon in infantry battalions. Very good weapon. A Dragon, its little brother, if you will, was a tube-launched, optically tracked, wire command link, shoulder-fired guided missile. Went very slow. It did not work as well. When I trained on it, we trained with some Israelis. They figured out how to do it. They did it better than we did. But every Israeli soldier that fired a Dragon fired 3 or 4 live rounds before he went to combat. We got 1 training round per infantry company per year in the U.S. Army because they were so expensive. We fired with simulators. Israelis, though, said that I trained with them on this thing, that their experience was the first time you fired a Dragon, you only had a 30% hit probability. Second time it was about 65th. Third time it was 90, and after that you wouldn't miss, but you had to learn to fly it. Because if you ever watched one go down range, it was like a 3-legged dog. Because it had retro rockets. Instead of the wires would fire little banks of rocket motors. It had a range of about 1,000 meters, 1,056 meters. Had a bank of rocket motors, so when you moved the tracker, it would activate these little retro rockets, and it just was the oddest looking thing. It would go downrange like that. The TOW was kind of smooth. Okay.
One last one here. You ended up with a BS in history?
No, actually, I ended up with a master's in counseling, Webster University.
Okay. How did you get this degree?
Well, I got
correspondence or
well when in the 70s after Vietnam we had all these young E6s, young E7s, guys that I was a staff sergeant at 21, And I could have made it earlier if I had probably but I stayed in one place long enough. And so the Army was overrun with staff sergeants. Now, I was a staff sergeant for 8 years. And to get promoted, you had to do something. And I had a platoon sergeant who said, if you want to get promoted, you got to do more than other people. So I took CLEP tests and I took Army correspondence courses. And one day I woke up and I had 63 semester hours of college credits. That was 2 years of college, but they said, that's not an associate degree. I was at Fort Lewis, Washington, and I went to the 9th Division. They had a little deal with the local community college where they had these like 10-week semesters. And if you took 3 courses, and they were on a quarter-hour system, so 15 quarter hours, you could establish residency. And so I took those 3 courses, and they gave me an associate degree. I had all the rest was CLEPs. And then they added my military credits and gave me another different type of associate degree. So I had 2 of them. I thought that was kind of cool, since I never even went to high school. And then when I got to Germany, an education center advisor, her name was Mary Sexton. I don't remember that name. It's a wife of one of the colonels on the base. Said, Sergeant Hall, you should get a bachelor's degree. And the state of New York has this program which they will accumulate your hours and tell you what to take. So I enrolled in it, and they said, you need to take this course and that course. And as an infantry platoon sergeant, it was kind of difficult. But in Germany, I took 5 courses. I took 4 courses in German language and 1 German life and culture. And I took a bunch of other CLEP tests, and then I think I actually only took like 10 college courses, but the state of New York issued me a bachelor's degree. And then when I was at the Sergeant Major's Academy, I already had a degree, and the Webster University had a program there. They didn't have history, which was my interest, but I was interested in people. The one that worked best for me, I tried a business management thing. I'd sat 1 accounting class one day and said, no, it's not for me. So I went into Webster in their MA in counseling, and it was matched to the Texas Licensed Professional Counsel law. So I knew I was going to retire in Texas, and I thought I would become a behavioral therapist. And I did. I did it the first 6 years I was retired. So I went at night. In the Sergeant Major's Academy, it was like it ended up being a twilight assignment. I spent 20 years in BDUs and fatigues, but the last 3 years I wore BDUs for about 2 days every 6 months. I wore what we call the Class B uniform, slacks and a shirt. It was all academic, and I got off at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock every day. It was the only time I ever did that in the Army. And I went through the Webster program. About a third of the students were military, about 2/3 weren't. And you can validate the CLEP process and all that because I had a 4.0 average. There was only 2 of us out of 36 that graduated. I'm very proud of that. I worked hard at it. And it was a 36-hour master's. I took an additional 3 courses to satisfy the Texas LPC law. And so I had 45 hours at 4.0. And I did that for the first 6 years I was retired, and then I decided to go make money, and I went and sold insurance.
Okay.
Well,
that was my next question.
Started my own business, and I started a business, and an insurance business. Counseling I thought it would be, when I wanted to do it, I thought it would be like counseling soldiers. I didn't realize, though, that the military only gets the best half of society, and counseling wore me out. People with profound problems wore me out. Counseling soldiers was easier because they basically would listen to you. And whatever. I started my own business, and I sold insurance as an individual from 1995 with a 1-year break. I taught high school history for 1 year. I tried Dunbar High School. I taught U.S. and world history as what was called a full-time substitute. It's an oxymoron there, but they couldn't find any teachers willing to teach there, and so I taught there. That wasn't for me, and I went back, and I still had done insurance part-time. And in 2000, I brought one of my sons with me, and we started Hall Insurance Agency, Inc., and we did very well. We sold a lot of health insurance, and then we changed to a multi-lines insurance agency, and I just got tired of insurance, and I retired last year and put a uniform back on, and I'm now working as a bodyguard and an armed security guy, running around with a uniform and a pistol, and I'm having fun. So, matter of fact, last night I was a security guard at Burleson for a Christian school. Played the Burleson Centennial High School. I was out there for that game. So that's what I do.
We appreciate your time, sir, coming down and spending this time with us, telling your story. We appreciate your time in the military and all those good things you've done for us.
And I appreciate the chance to serve. I enjoyed it. I don't know where I would have been had I not become a soldier. I don't know what my life would have been.
There are a lot of those success stories, certainly are. You bet. Good for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.